Maya Chen's fingers hovered over the holographic interface, watching the real-time analytics cascade across her cramped studio apartment. Second-chance notifications pulsed like a heartbeat. 3.2 million active users, 847,000 transactions in the last hour, carbon footprint reduction metrics climbing steadily toward her monthly targets. The numbers painted a story her family would never believe. Their failure daughter had built an empire they couldn't fathom. She dismissed the display with a flick of her wrist and turned to the vintage clothing racks that lined every wall. Physical garments in 2087 were a luxury most couldn't afford. 3D-printed smart fabrics dominated the market, shifting colors and patterns based on neural feedback and social credit scores. But Maya's apartment looked like a museum of textile history, each piece carefully curated from the pre-digital era when clothes were made to last decades, not delete themselves after programmed obsolescence. Her neural implant chimed softly. Monthly Chen family gathering, mandatory attendance, 7 p.m. The reminder sent familiar dread trickling down her spine. Maya caught her reflection in the mirror. Angular features inherited from her grandmother, dark hair that refused to hold the glossy perfection her mother demanded, and clothes that screamed vintage eccentric rather than Chen family legacy. She selected a blazer from 2019, its wool fibers worn soft with age, and paired it with pants that predated smart fabrics by 6 decades. Her mother would hate it. Derek would mock it. Her father would ignore it entirely, lost in whatever synthetic bourbon was numbing his latest business failures. The irony wasn't lost on her. While her family obsessed over maintaining their crumbling empire of algorithms and automated real estate portfolios, Maya had quietly built something that mattered. Second Chance had revolutionized how humans thought about consumption, creating a circular economy that had prevented 847 million garments from entering the waste streams that choked their dying planet. But they saw her as the idealistic daughter who'd wasted her Stanford Quantum Economics MBA on environmental causes. Tonight's dinner would be another performance in their monthly theater of disappointment. Maya's reflection stared back at her, and for a moment she wondered what would happen if she simply told them the truth. The fantasy lasted exactly 3 seconds before reality crashed back. They wouldn't believe her. Worse, they'd find a way to take credit for it. The Chen estate rose from the Berkeley Hills like a monument to algorithmic wealth, its bioresponsive walls shifting from pearl to platinum as Maya's transport approached. Smart glass windows adjusted their opacity based on interior mood sensors, currently reflecting the cold blue that meant her family was in full business mode. The house itself was worth 40 million, though Maya suspected the mortgage bots were circling like digital vultures. She paused at the front door, letting the security system scan her biometrics. The delay was intentional, a small reminder that she was barely tolerated here, despite her name being in the property's DNA signature. Maya. Elizabeth Chen materialized in the foyer, her appearance immaculate as always. Neural responsive makeup shifted subtly across her mother's features, smoothing lines that betrayed her 55 years. Her dress was synthetic silk that cost more than most people's annual housing allotment, its fabric programmed to enhance her posture and project confidence she no longer naturally possessed. Mother. Maya stepped inside, noting how the house's ambient lighting dimmed slightly around her. Another petty programming choice that made her appear less vibrant than the rest of the family? Still dressing like you shop at archaeological sites, I see. Elizabeth's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Derek brought someone tonight, a potential investor for the New Singapore project. Try not to embarrass us. The New Singapore project. Maya had run the numbers on her mother's latest venture 3 months ago, an artificial island development that would be underwater within a decade due to rising sea levels. She'd tried to warn them, but her environmental concerns were dismissed as idealistic nonsense. "I'll do my best to contain my archaeological wardrobe," Maya replied, following her mother toward the dining room. The scent of synthesized Wagyu filled the air, perfectly calibrated to trigger nostalgic responses in their enhanced olfactory systems. Maya's unmodified nose picked up the subtle chemical undertones that betrayed the meat's laboratory origins, another reminder that authenticity was becoming extinct in their world. Richard Chen stood at the room's center, a holographic whiskey in one hand and his latest investor relations report floating beside him in translucent blue. Her father had aged badly since the last family gathering, stress lines that no amount of neural programming could hide, and a tremor in his left hand that suggested his liver enhancement was failing. "There's our wayward daughter," he announced without looking up from his data. "Thought maybe you'd finally gotten the message and decided to skip the message." 3 weeks ago, Maya had sat in the family attorney's office, watching their faces change as Grandmother Chen's will was executed through quantum-encrypted blockchain protocols. $26 million in untraceable cryptocurrency transferred directly to Maya's personal wallet with a holographic message that still played in her memory. To Maya, the only one with a conscience and backbone, use this to build something that matters. Her family had been livid. Their real estate empire was hemorrhaging money, propped up by increasingly desperate loans from Algorithm Banking Syndicate. The new Singapore project needed immediate capital injection, or the entire Chen financial ecosystem would collapse within months. They demanded she transfer the inheritance. Maya had refused. "I showed up," Maya said, taking her assigned seat, the one with its back to the room's main holographic displays, another subtle reminder of her place in the family hierarchy. Derek entered with his usual swagger, his enhanced physique and neural-optimized charisma making him look like a recruitment poster for genetic privilege. At 30, he was everything their parents wanted in a son: ambitious, ruthlessly practical, and completely without conscience. His hedge fund had been underperforming for 2 years, but he'd managed to hide the losses behind increasingly creative accounting algorithms. "Maya?" Derek's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Still living in that adorable studio apartment? When are you going to move somewhere worthy of the Chen name?" "When somewhere worthy becomes available," Maya replied, letting the barb land where it would. Derek's companion stepped into the room, and Maya felt her composure slip slightly. The woman was stunning in that artificial way that came from expensive genetic consultations. Perfectly symmetrical features, eyes that shifted color based on ambient lighting, and a body that defied both physics and biology. Her smart dress created the illusion of movement even when she stood perfectly still. "This is Vivian," Derek announced, his hand possessive on the woman's lower back. "She's representing Aurora Ventures. They're very interested in our sustainable development initiatives." Maya almost laughed. Sustainable? Their new Singapore project would create more environmental damage in its first year than Maya's app had prevented in its entire existence. "How wonderful," Elizabeth said, her neural-enhanced voice projecting warmth she didn't feel. "Maya works in environmental things too, don't you, dear?" The dismissal was surgical in its precision. Maya felt the familiar sting of being reduced to a footnote in her own family's narrative. "I run a circular economy platform," Maya said, meeting Vivian's enhanced gaze directly. "Second chance. We've prevented about 847 million garments from entering waste streams while building sustainable partnerships with—" "How quaint," Vivian interrupted, her voice programmed for maximum social impact. "Derek mentioned you have a little app for used clothes. It's so important to have hobbies." Hobbies. Maya's quarterly revenue exceeded Derek's hedge fund's annual performance, but she was discussing hobbies. Dinner was a carefully choreographed dance of passive aggression and artificial pleasantries. The synthesized food tasted exactly like its extinct organic counterparts, while conversation flowed around Maya as if she were furniture. Derek regaled Vivian with exaggerated stories of the family's business acumen. Elizabeth shared carefully edited versions of their social connections. Richard remained focused on his holographic data streams, occasionally grunting agreement with whatever Derek was saying. Maya ate in silence, watching the performance unfold. Her family had always been skilled at presenting a united front to outsiders, but tonight felt different, more desperate. The cracks in their facade were showing, visible to anyone who knew how to look. "The inheritance situation has been resolved," Elizabeth announced suddenly, her words aimed at Vivian but intended for Maya. "Family matters, you understand. Sometimes younger generation needs guidance about financial responsibility." Maya's fork paused halfway to her mouth. So that was their strategy: present the inheritance as already decided, pressure her to comply through social embarrassment. Absolutely, Vivian agreed, her enhanced empathy algorithms generating appropriate concern. Young people can be so impulsive with large sums. It's wise to have family oversight. Maya's grandmother left her a significant sum, Derek added, his tone suggesting Maya was barely competent to handle pocket money. But we've agreed it should be invested in proven family ventures rather than experimental projects. All eyes turned to Maya. This was her cue to smile, nod, and surrender her inheritance to save face in front of Derek's potential investor. The script had been written without her input, as always. Instead, Maya set down her fork with deliberate precision. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient sound dampeners, "I haven't agreed to anything." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elizabeth's smile became brittle. Derek's enhanced charisma flickered momentarily, revealing genuine annoyance underneath. "Maya," Richard spoke without looking up from his data. "We've discussed this. The family needs many things," Maya interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "But my grandmother's inheritance isn't one of them." Derek leaned forward, his social optimization protocols shifting into intimidation mode. "Come on, Maya. What are you going to do with $26 million? Buy more vintage clothes? Fund more environmental guilt projects? Face reality? You're 28, single, living in a studio apartment, running some app nobody's heard of. This family has supported your idealistic phase long enough. It's time to contribute meaningfully." The words hit their intended targets. Maya felt the familiar burn of being categorized as the family failure, the disappointing daughter whose dreams were too small for the Chen legacy. But something was different this time. The secret she'd been carrying, her app's true success, the millions of users, the quietly revolutionary impact she'd created, felt like armor against their dismissal. "Contribute meaningfully," Maya repeated, tasting the phrase like poison. "And what would that look like, Derek? Investing in a project that will be underwater within a decade, propping up algorithms that optimize for profit while the planet burns?" "Don't be dramatic," Elizabeth snapped, her composure cracking. "Environmental concerns are secondary to family survival. The Chen name means something in this world, Maya. It means legacy, influence, power. Your grandmother understood that. My grandmother left the money to me," Maya said quietly. "Not to the Chen name, not to family survival. To me, there's a difference." Vivian watched the exchange with the fascination of someone observing an exotic species. Her neural implants were probably recording everything for later analysis, turning their family dysfunction into market research data. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of climate control systems and the distant pulse of data flowing through the house's quantum networks. Maya could feel her family's anger like heat radiating from a fire, but she no longer flinched from it. The doorbell chimed, its tone cutting through the tension like a blade. Elizabeth frowned. Their household AI never allowed unscheduled visitors without prior approval. "We're not expecting anyone," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. Maya's neural implant pinged softly with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "I believe we have a contract to discuss. AR star." Her breath caught Alessandro Romano, the tech billionaire whose investment firm had been circling Second Chance for months, conducting due diligence with the kind of thoroughness that suggested serious interest. Maya had been negotiating through intermediaries, never expecting direct contact from the legendary investor himself. "I'll get it," she said, standing quickly. "Sit down, Maya," Richard commanded, finally looking up from his data streams. "We're not finished here." But Maya was already moving toward the foyer, her pulse quickening with possibility. Behind her, she heard Derek asking Vivian if she knew anything about unexpected guests, Elizabeth muttering about proper protocols, and her father's chair scraping against the floor as he rose to follow. The front door's security scanner completed its analysis. Alessandro Romano, Romano Ventures net worth, 847 billion credits, security clearance platinum. Maya's hand hesitated on the door controls. Once she opened this door, everything would change. Her family would see her secret reflected in Alessandro's presence, and there would be no more hiding in plain sight. The scanner chimed impatiently, awaiting her decision. Maya opened the door. Alessandro Romano stood on her family's threshold like he owned the world, which, given his net worth, wasn't far from the truth. Tall and lean, with the kind of confidence that came from building empires before age 35, he wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's annual income, but somehow made it look effortless. His dark hair was perfectly tousled, his olive skin unmarked by enhancement scars, and his eyes held an intelligence that made Maya's enhanced family members look like pale imitations of human potential. But what stopped her breath wasn't his obvious wealth or devastating good looks. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room worth his attention, like she was already a queen, and he was simply acknowledging her crown. "Alessandro," Maya managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Maya." His smile was warm, genuine, completely unlike the calculated expressions she'd grown up with. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but when you didn't respond to my messages, I got concerned. We have that contract to finalize." Behind her, Maya heard her family's approaching footsteps and the subtle whir of their neural enhancement systems activating, automatically analyzing this unexpected visitor, cross-referencing his identity against their social and business databases, calculating threat levels and opportunity indices. "Contract?" Derek's voice was sharp with suspicion as he appeared beside Maya. "What contract?" Alessandro's gaze swept past Maya to take in her family, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or recognition. Like he'd walked into exactly the situation he'd expected. "You must be Maya's family," he said, stepping into the foyer without invitation. "She's told me so little about you." The comment landed like a precision strike. Elizabeth's neural-enhanced smile faltered. Derek's charisma protocols stuttered as his brain processed the implication. Richard emerged from the dining room, his business instincts finally overriding his synthetic bourbon. Alessandro moved to stand behind Maya's chair as they returned to the dining room, his presence transforming the space's power dynamics. When his hand came to rest on the back of her chair, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his palm, Maya's pulse accelerated dangerously. "I hope you don't mind if I steal her away after dinner," he said, his voice carrying undertones that made Maya's skin tingle. "We're celebrating tonight." "Celebrating what exactly?" Derek demanded, his social optimization systems fully engaged now. Alessandro's smile widened, and Maya realized he was enjoying this. Whatever game her family had been playing, they'd just encountered a master. "Maya hasn't told you?" His tone was perfectly calibrated to suggest secrets and significance. How modest of her! He looked down at Maya, and she saw mischief dancing in his dark eyes. This was a test, she realized, a chance to trust him, to finally stop hiding the success she'd built in shadows. "Tell them, cara mia," he said softly, the endearment rolling off his tongue with Italian warmth. "They should know what kind of empire their daughter has built." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening, a cage unlocking. For years she'd minimized her achievements, afraid of changing family dynamics, afraid of seeming boastful. But Alessandro's encouraging presence, the way he looked at her like she was already everything she'd worked to become, gave her courage she'd never known she possessed. She stood slowly, meeting each family member's gaze in turn. "Alessandro's firm is acquiring second chance," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "For $200 million. The silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear the house's quantum processors cycling, the distant hum of traffic regulation algorithms, the soft whisper of her own enhanced breathing. Then Derek's voice, barely a whisper, 200 million. Maya smiled for the first time all evening. The largest sustainable fashion acquisition in history. The number hung in the air like a digital ghost, visible in the slack expressions of Maya's enhanced family members as their neural processors struggled to compute what they'd just heard. $200 million. The sum dwarfed their entire estate, their failing businesses, their carefully maintained facade of success. Alessandro stepped closer to Maya, his presence both protective and predatory. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle scent of his cologne. Something earthy and expensive that hadn't been synthesized in a lab. Everything about him was authentic in a world that had forgotten what that meant. "I'm sorry," Derek said, his voice processing through disbelief filters. "Did you say 200 million? Alessandro confirmed, his smile sharp as obsidian. The largest sustainable fashion acquisition in venture capital history. He pulled out a translucent device, its holographic display materializing between them. "Perhaps you'd like to see the documentation." The contract materialized in blue light, dense with legal terminology and blockchain verification codes. But it was the signature lines that made Maya's breath catch. Her name beside Alessandro's company logo, with execution dates scheduled for next week. Elizabeth's neural-enhanced composure finally cracked. "That's impossible. Maya runs a little app for used clothes." "Second chance," Alessandro said, pronouncing each syllable with deliberate precision, "is a revolutionary platform that has fundamentally altered how humanity approaches consumption." He gestured, and the hologram shifted to display user statistics that made Derek's hedge fund performance look like amateur hour. 15 million active users across 6 continents, partnerships with over 10,000 sustainable brands, carbon footprint reduction equivalent to taking 2 million vehicles off the road. Maya watched her family's faces change as the numbers cascaded through the air. Richard's business instincts were finally overriding his synthetic alcohol haze. Derek's social optimization protocols were running damage control algorithms. Vivian looked like she was recording every moment for future analysis. But Maya never mentioned. Elizabeth started, then stopped, realization dawning in her enhanced eyes. "Didn't she?" Alessandro's tone carried dangerous amusement. "How unfortunate. I assumed family would be the first to know about such achievements." The implication cut deep. Maya had tried to share her successes over the years, small victories at first, then increasingly significant milestones. But her family's dismissal had been so consistent, so thorough, that she'd simply stopped trying. Their ignorance was self-inflicted, and Alessandro was making sure they understood that. "The United Nations Environmental Council recognized Maya's work last year," Alessandro continued, his voice warm with pride that felt genuine. "Their Global Impact Award. The ceremony was live-streamed to 47 million viewers. Derek's enhanced memory was probably accessing that information now, cross-referencing public records his filters had previously ignored because they were tagged as environmental nonsense. His face went pale as the data compiled. Maya felt something shifting in her chest. Not the familiar ache of disappointment, but something fiercer. For the first time in years, someone was fighting for her. Someone saw her worth and was willing to defend it against people who should have been her greatest champions. Alessandro leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You look absolutely stunning when you're proving people wrong," he whispered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Maya's pulse spiked, heat spreading down her spine. "Is that terribly unprofessional?" she whispered back, surprised by her own boldness. "I've always preferred personal to professional," he murmured, his hand sliding to rest lightly against her waist. The touch sent electricity through her entire nervous system, a reminder that authentic human connection still existed in their digitally mediated world. Elizabeth was the first to attempt damage control, her social programming activating like emergency protocols. "Well, of course we're incredibly proud of Maya's venture. We've always supported her environmental interests." "Always?" Alessandro's eyebrow arched with lethal precision. "That's interesting, because Maya mentioned that her family considers her work idealistic nonsense that wastes her Stanford education." The quote hit like a precision strike. Those were Richard's exact words from 6 months ago, spoken during Maya's last attempt to explain her app's growing impact. She'd stopped trying after that. "There must be some misunderstanding," Derek interjected, his charisma enhancement working overtime. "We've always believed in Maya's potential, haven't we, Dad?" Richard was studying the holographic contract with the focus of a man whose entire worldview was recalibrating. "These numbers," he said slowly, "they're verified through quantum financial?" "Triple verified," Alessandro confirmed. "Your daughter has built something remarkable, Mr. Chen, something that will outlast market fluctuations, algorithmic trading, and artificial real estate bubbles." The barb was subtle, but devastating. Richard's empire was built on exactly those unstable foundations, and everyone in the room knew it. Maya felt Alessandro's thumb brush against her waist, a small gesture that sent warmth spiraling through her core. He was enjoying this, she realized. Not just the business triumph, but the chance to defend her against people who'd never seen her value. "Maya's TED Talk has 8 million views," Alessandro continued conversationally. "Her Fast Company cover story was the magazine's most read piece of the year. Forbes named her one of their 30 under 30 environmental leaders 3 years running. Each fact landed like a hammer blow. Quite impressive for a hobby." Vivian flinched at the word, her own dismissive term thrown back at her with surgical precision. Derek was frantically accessing public databases through his neural interface, his enhanced eyes flickering with data streams as he tried to verify Alessandro's claims. Maya could see the exact moment when the reality hit him. His sister, the family disappointment, was more successful than everyone in the room combined. The New York Stock Exchange invited Maya to ring the opening bell for Sustainability Week, Alessandro added, his tone casual but his message clear. She declined, preferring to focus on actual impact rather than publicity. Maya remembered that invitation. She'd mentioned it at last month's dinner, hoping for some acknowledgement. Derek had laughed and asked if it was a participation trophy. Elizabeth had changed the subject to discuss the importance of serious career moves. Now they were seeing her through Alessandro's eyes, not as the disappointing daughter, but as someone worthy of protection and admiration. The shift in perspective was intoxicating. Alessandro's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly against her waist, a gesture so subtle that only she would notice. But the message was clear. "I'm here. I see you. You're not alone anymore." I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding, Alessandro said, his voice taking on the edge that had made him legendary in boardrooms across 3 continents. You seem to believe Maya owes you something, her inheritance perhaps, her future earnings, her gratitude. The family exchanged glances, their enhanced communication systems probably buzzing with private messages and damage assessment protocols. But let me clarify something, Alessandro continued, pulling out another device. Maya's acquisition deal includes performance bonuses tied to environmental impact metrics. If Second Chance continues its current trajectory, the total package could exceed $500 million. $500 million. The number hit the room like an electromagnetic pulse, shorting out the family's collective composure. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Even she hadn't known about the performance bonuses. Additionally, Alessandro said, his smile turning predatory, Maya will be joining Romano Ventures as a partner, full equity stake, decision-making authority over all environmental investments. He paused, letting the implications settle. Our environmental portfolio is currently valued at $12 billion. Elizabeth's neural enhancements were probably running emergency diagnostics, trying to process how her failure daughter had become worth more than their entire extended family combined. That inheritance you've been demanding, Alessandro continued with surgical precision, amounts to roughly 0.4% of Maya's current net worth. Pocket change, really. Derek's face had gone ashen. His hedge fund's best year had generated $18 million in profit, a sum Maya now earned in quarterly bonuses. Richard set down his holographic whiskey with shaking hands. Maya, he said, his voice hoarse, why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air like an accusation, but Maya heard the desperation beneath it. They were realizing what they'd lost, not just her inheritance, but her. The family's only genuine success story, dismissed and diminished until she'd stopped sharing her victories with them entirely. Would you have listened? Maya asked quietly. Or would you have found another way to explain why it didn't count? The silence that followed was answer enough. Alessandro's hand moved to the small of her back, a gesture that managed to be both possessive and supportive. I should mention, he said, his voice dropping to intimate warmth. Maya and I aren't just business partners anymore. Maya's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't defined what was happening between them beyond the electric tension and meaningful glances. But Alessandro was claiming her publicly, marking territory in front of her family with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. I've been trying to convince her to have dinner with me for months, he continued, his eyes meeting hers with heat that made her pulse race. Tonight seemed like the perfect opportunity to ask in person. The implication was clear. He hadn't just come here for business. He'd come for her. Elizabeth looked like she might faint. Derek was still frantically accessing Alessandro's public profile, his enhanced eyes widening as he processed the man's net worth and influence. Vivian had gone completely silent, probably calculating how this shift would affect Aurora Ventures' investment interest. Alessandro turned to face Maya fully, his hands framing her waist with deliberate intimacy. What do you say, cara mia? Will you let me take you somewhere that appreciates both your brilliance and your beauty? The endearment sent fire through her veins. But more than the attraction, more than the romance, was the way he looked at her, like she was already everything she'd worked to become, like her worth had never been in question. Maya, wait. Elizabeth's voice cracked with desperation. We should discuss this. As a family, there are opportunities. Opportunities! Alessandro's laugh was soft and dangerous. What opportunities could you possibly offer someone who's already achieved more than your entire family combined? Richard stepped forward, his business instincts finally overriding his pride. Partnership opportunities. The Chen name still carries weight in certain circles. Maya could benefit from our connections, our experience. Your experience? Alessandro repeated, his tone suggesting he was enjoying this immensely. You mean your experience running businesses into the ground? Your expertise in algorithmic real estate speculation? Your proven track record of dismissing revolutionary ideas? Each question landed like a physical blow. Maya watched her family's carefully constructed superiority complex crumble in real time, their enhanced faces unable to hide the devastation beneath. Maya has already surpassed anything your family has accomplished, Alessandro continued relentlessly. She's built an empire based on authentic value creation, environmental stewardship, and genuine human connection. Everything you've spent decades trying to buy through technological enhancement and artificial optimization. Maya felt the truth of his words settling into her bones. She had built something meaningful. She had succeeded on her own terms, creating value that would outlast market crashes and technological disruption. Derek made one last desperate attempt. Maya, we're still family. Blood matters. Legacy matters. You can't just walk away from... From what? Maya interrupted, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. From being told my work doesn't matter. From watching you demand my grandmother's inheritance to prop up failing businesses. From being treated like the family disappointment when I'm the only one actually succeeding. Alessandro's hands tightened on her waist, anchoring her to this moment of truth-telling. I tried to share my successes with you, Maya continued, feeling years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Every milestone, every achievement, every recognition. But you couldn't see past your own prejudices about what success looks like. You wanted me to be ashamed of caring about the environment, ashamed of choosing substance over status, ashamed of being authentically myself. Elizabeth's neural-enhanced composure was completely gone now, replaced by raw desperation. Maya, please, we can change. We can learn to appreciate— No, Maya said firmly. You can learn to appreciate what I've accomplished now that someone else has validated it, but that's not the same thing as believing in me. Alessandro stepped closer, his presence radiating protective confidence. Maya, he said, his voice low and intimate despite their audience. Let me ask you something I should have asked months ago. He turned her to face him fully, his hands framing her face with reverent care. The gesture was tender, romantic, and utterly fearless, a public declaration that she mattered to him. Will you trust me enough to let me spend the rest of my life proving that someone sees your true worth? He asked, his eyes holding promises that made her heart race. Starting with dinner tonight, somewhere that celebrates both your mind and your heart. Somewhere you'll never have to apologize for being exactly who you are. Maya looked into his dark eyes and saw her future reflected there, not as the disappointing Chen daughter, but as Maya, the woman who'd changed the world while her family wasn't watching, the woman worthy of love from someone who saw her clearly from the very beginning. Behind them, her family watched in silence as the power dynamic completed its revolution. They'd spent the evening trying to diminish her, to force her into their narrow definition of family contribution. Instead, they'd witnessed her transformation from hidden success to acknowledged queen. Maya smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. I thought you'd never ask. Alessandro's answering smile could have powered the house's quantum processors. Then let's go show the world what authentic success looks like. As they moved toward the door, Maya felt her family's desperate stares like heat against her back. But for the first time in her life, their opinion didn't matter. She'd found someone who saw her worth without needing external validation, someone who chose her not despite her values, but because of them. The golden cage door was finally open, and Maya Chen was free. Maya took Alessandro's offered arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. The gesture was simple, a woman accepting an escort to dinner, but it carried the weight of revolution. She was choosing herself over family obligation, authentic partnership over toxic familiarity, her future over their past. Maya, don't do this. Elizabeth's voice cracked with panic, her neural enhancements unable to mask the raw desperation underneath. We can work this out. Family first, remember. That's what grandmother always said. Maya paused at the dining room's threshold, Alessandro's warmth solid against her side. Grandmother said family first, she agreed quietly. But she also said that family is what you make it. She chose me with that inheritance, Mother. She chose me over the Chen name, over the family business, over all of you. The words hung in the air like a quantum signature, impossible to delete or modify. Elizabeth's enhanced face cycled through expressions as her social programming tried to compute an appropriate response. But the new Singapore project, Derek interjected, his desperation making him reckless. We need that inheritance, Maya. The algorithmic projections show that it will be underwater in 8 years, Maya finished, turning to face him fully. I ran the environmental impact assessments, Derek. Sea level rise, extreme weather patterns, infrastructure vulnerability. I tried to tell you, but my environmental concerns were idealistic nonsense, remember? Richard stepped forward, his business instincts finally overriding his pride. Maya, if you'd share the data, we could pivot, adapt the project, make it sustainable. Like you made your real estate algorithm sustainable, Maya asked, her tone surgical in its precision. Like you made Derek's hedge fund sustainable, like you made this family sustainable. Alessandro's thumb traced a small circle against her arm, a gesture so subtle that only she could feel it, but it sent warmth spiraling through her entire nervous system. He was anchoring her to this moment, to her own power, to the truth she'd finally found courage to speak. The data has always been available, Maya continued. The climate projections, the economic models, the sustainable alternatives. But you couldn't see past quarterly profits and social credit scores. You built empires on sand and blamed me for pointing out the tide was coming in. Vivian, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Maya, your family clearly loves you. Surely there's room for compromise. Love. Maya's laugh was soft and bitter. They love the idea of me as their safety net. They love what my inheritance could buy them. They love having a successful daughter now that someone else has validated my worth. She looked at each family member in turn. But they've never loved me enough to actually listen to me. Alessandro's hand tightened on her arm, a gesture of support that felt like a promise. Maya, he said, his voice pitched low enough for intimacy despite their audience. We should go. I know a place where your ideas are celebrated, not dismissed. Elizabeth made one last desperate attempt. Maya, please, we're family. We can change. We can learn to appreciate. No, Maya said firmly, the word carrying finality that her neural-enhanced family couldn't argue with. You can learn to appreciate my success now that it's been externally validated. But appreciation isn't the same as belief. Recognition isn't the same as support. And acceptance isn't the same as love. She turned toward Alessandro, seeing her future reflected in his dark eyes. I'm ready to go. As they walked toward the foyer, Maya could hear her family's frantic whispers behind them. Neural-enhanced communication protocols buzzing with damage assessment and recovery strategies. But their desperation felt distant now, like background noise that no longer concerned her. Alessandro moved to help her with her vintage coat, his hands brushing against her shoulders with deliberate gentleness. The touch sent electricity down her spine, a reminder that authentic human connection still existed in their digitally mediated world. Maya, wait, Richard called from the dining room doorway. The inheritance, what will you do with it? She paused, one hand on the door's biometric scanner. Alessandro stepped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle scent of his cologne, something real and unenhanced in a world of artificial perfection. "I'm going to invest it," Maya said without turning around, "in myself, in my work, in projects that will still matter when your algorithms have crashed and your artificial islands have drowned." "But Maya," Elizabeth's voice was barely a whisper, "what about family? What about legacy?" Maya finally turned, meeting her mother's enhanced gaze with eyes that held no anger, only clarity. "I'm celebrating finally understanding that I don't need this family's approval to know my own worth. And I'm celebrating finding someone who saw that worth from day one." Alessandro's smile was warm and predatory simultaneously, his hand moving to rest against the small of her back with possessive confidence. "My transport is outside," he said, his voice carrying undertones that made her pulse race. "I know a restaurant where they serve food that wasn't designed by algorithms, where conversation matters more than social credit scores, where you can be exactly who you are without apology." The promise in his voice was intoxicating. Not just dinner, but a life where her authentic self was celebrated rather than criticized. "That sounds perfect," Maya said, letting the door scan her biometrics for the last time as a supplicant in her family's hierarchy. As they stepped into the night air, Alessandro paused, his hand still warm against her back. "Maya," he said, his accent making her name sound like poetry. "Before we go anywhere else, I need you to know something." She turned to face him, her heart racing at the intensity in his expression. "This isn't charity," he said, his hands framing her face with reverent care. "This isn't some wealthy man rescuing a damsel in distress. You're the most accomplished person I know. You've built something that will outlast both our lifetimes. You've changed the world while your family wasn't watching." His thumbs traced along her cheekbones. "I'm the one who should feel grateful that you're willing to have dinner with me." The honesty in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was already everything she'd worked to become, made her feel dizzy with possibility. This was what authentic attraction felt like, not enhancement-driven lust or algorithm-optimized compatibility, but genuine recognition between two people who saw each other clearly. "No judgment," he continued, his voice dropping to intimate warmth. "No demands, no expectations except good conversation with someone who appreciates what you've built, what you are, what you're still becoming." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, not sadness but overwhelming relief. After years of being diminished, dismissed, and demanded of, here was someone offering partnership without conditions. "Alessandro," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, take me somewhere I can be myself." His answering smile could have powered the city's quantum grid. Chapter 10. 6 months later. The Global Innovation Conference buzzed with the energy of 10,000 entrepreneurs, their neural interfaces creating a low hum of shared data and collaborative dreaming. Maya adjusted the microphone at the podium, the massive audience stretching beyond her enhanced vision. Behind her, a holographic display read, "Building Worth When Family Doesn't Believe in Your Dreams." The engagement ring on her finger caught the stage lights, not because it was expensive, though Alessandro's taste ran toward perfection, but because it represented something her family had never offered: unconditional belief in her worth. "6 months ago," Maya began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium's acoustic enhancement, "I sat at a family dinner being told I was a failure, that my work didn't matter, that my dreams were too small for our family's legacy." A ripple of recognition moved through the audience. Every entrepreneur knew that feeling, the moment when the people who should champion you become the ones trying to clip your wings. "They demanded I hand over my grandmother's inheritance to save their failing businesses," Maya continued. "They couldn't understand why a failure like me should have access to real money. They saw me as the family disappointment, the idealistic daughter who wasted her Stanford education on environmental causes. Maya's enhanced vision picked out Alessandro in the front row, his dark eyes warm with pride and something deeper, the kind of love that saw her completely and chose her anyway. He wore the same confident smile that had first captivated her, but now she knew the gentle heart underneath the billionaire's armor. What they didn't know, Maya said, her voice growing stronger, was that while they'd been dismissing my little app for used clothes, I'd quietly built something revolutionary, something that mattered, something that would outlast their market manipulations and artificial real estate bubbles. The audience leaned forward, hungry for the revelation she'd been building toward. That night, while they were demanding my inheritance, I signed a deal to sell my company for $200 million. The number sent a ripple of appreciation through the audience. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was realizing that I didn't need their approval to know my own worth. Maya's enhanced vision caught her parents in the back of the auditorium, their faces carefully composed in expressions of pride they'd never shown when it mattered. Elizabeth wore a dress programmed to project maternal warmth. Richard's neural enhancements had finally been calibrated to recognize environmental achievement as legitimate success. Derek sat beside them, his hedge fund now specializing in sustainable investments. A pivot that came 6 months too late to matter to Maya. They'd finally learned to appreciate her work, but only after the world had validated it first. Their presence here was another performance, another attempt to claim credit for success they'd actively discouraged. The most important lesson I learned, Maya continued, wasn't about business or money. It was about surrounding yourself with people who see your potential, not just your failures, who celebrate your authenticity instead of demanding you change to fit their vision of success. Alessandro's smile widened, and Maya felt her heart skip the way it had that first night when he'd walked into her family's dining room like he owned the world, and then proved that he saw her as its rightful queen. I learned that sometimes the family that chooses you is more valuable than the one you're born into, Maya said, her voice carrying across the auditorium with quiet power. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living your truth so fully that others have no choice but to see it. The standing ovation began in the front rows and spread like wildfire through the auditorium, 10,000 entrepreneurs rising to their feet in recognition of a truth they'd all lived in some form. Maya stood at the podium, watching the sea of faces, feeling the weight of her grandmother's legacy finally fulfilled. She'd used the inheritance exactly as intended, not to prop up failing family businesses, but to expand Second Chance's global reach. They now operated on 7 continents, had prevented over 2 billion garments from entering waste streams, and employed over 50,000 people in sustainable fashion initiatives. The money her family had seen as salvation had become seed capital for changing the world. As the applause continued, Maya caught sight of a young woman in the third row, maybe 25, wearing clothes that marked her as struggling financially, but with eyes that burned with entrepreneurial fire. The woman was crying, her neural interfaces probably recording every word for later analysis and inspiration. Maya had been that woman once, dismissed by those who should have supported her, carrying dreams that seemed too big for the box others had built around her. Now she was proving that authentic success was possible, that environmental consciousness and profit could coexist, that staying true to your values was not just morally right, but strategically brilliant. The applause finally began to fade, and Maya raised her hand for attention. "Before I leave you today," she said, "I want to address something directly to anyone in this audience whose family doesn't understand their dreams, whose parents dismiss their environmental concerns as idealistic, whose siblings mock their values as unrealistic, whose loved ones demand they abandon authenticity for approval. I see you. I believe in you. And I'm here to tell you that your dreams are not too small. Your values are not too impractical. Your vision is not too idealistic." Her voice grew stronger, carrying the conviction of someone who'd lived this truth. Build something that matters. Surround yourself with people who see your worth. Choose partners who celebrate your authenticity rather than demanding you change. And remember that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is not proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. The second standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As Maya finally stepped down from the podium, Alessandro was there waiting, his hand immediately finding the small of her back in the gesture that had become their signature. The possessive intimacy of it still sent heat through her system, but now it also carried the weight of partnership, of shared dreams, of a future they were building together. "How does it feel?" he asked, his accent making the question sound like poetry. "To know that 10,000 people just heard your story and decided to believe in themselves." Maya looked out at the dispersing crowd, watching young entrepreneurs exchange contact information and discuss collaborations that might change the world. Her story had become their permission to dream bigger, to refuse compromise, to demand recognition for work that mattered. "It feels like grandmother knew exactly what she was doing," Maya said, leaning into Alessandro's warmth. "She didn't just leave me money, she left me the courage to use it." Behind them, Maya's family approached with carefully programmed smiles and strategically timed congratulations. But their approval felt like background noise now, pleasant but ultimately irrelevant. She'd built her own family of choice, found her own sources of validation, created her own definition of success. Elizabeth reached them first, her neural enhancements projecting maternal pride that might have been genuine or might have been algorithmic. Maya no longer cared enough to analyze the difference. "Maya, darling," Elizabeth said, her voice warm with enhancement-assisted emotion. That was incredible. We're so proud of what you've accomplished." Maya smiled, the expression polite but distant. "Thank you, Mother. I'm glad you could be here." The words carried no anger, no bitterness, just the cordial acknowledgement one might give to distant acquaintances. Her family had lost the right to claim her victories, but they'd also lost the power to inflict wounds. Their opinions simply didn't matter anymore. Richard stepped forward, his business instincts finally recognizing environmental leadership as legitimate success. "Maya, I hope you know that we always believed in your potential. We just didn't understand." "Dad," Maya interrupted gently. "It's okay. You don't need to understand now. You don't need to apologize. You don't need to explain. I've moved past needing your approval to know my own worth." The statement wasn't cruel, but it was final. Maya had forgiven her family's blindness, but forgiveness didn't require renewed intimacy. She'd built a life where their limitations no longer constrained her happiness. Alessandro's hand tightened protectively against her back, and Maya felt the warmth of being truly seen, truly valued, truly chosen. This was what authentic partnership looked like, not the conditional love that demanded she change to earn approval, but the unconditional support that celebrated exactly who she was. Derek approached last, his enhanced charisma finally recognizing her as someone worth impressing rather than someone safe to dismiss. "Maya, I wanted to say, what you've built is incredible. Maybe we could discuss some investment opportunities, sustainable partnerships." Maya studied her brother's face, seeing the calculation behind his newfound respect. He wanted access to her success, her connections, her revolutionary approach to business. But he still didn't see her. He saw what she could do for him. "Derek," Maya said, her tone carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to value herself appropriately. "You spent years telling me my work didn't matter. You mocked my environmental concerns as idealistic nonsense. You demanded I abandon my principles to prop up your failing investments." She paused, letting the truth settle between them. "Now you want to partner with me because other people have validated my worth. That's not partnership, that's opportunism." Derek's enhanced features cycled through expressions as his social optimization protocols searched for the right response. But Maya was already turning away, Alessandro's presence warm and solid beside her. "Come on," Alessandro said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Let's go celebrate somewhere that's always appreciated your worth." As they walked away together, Maya heard her family's voices behind them, strategizing, calculating, trying to find new angles of approach. But their schemes felt distant now, like problems that belonged to someone else's life. Maya had learned the most valuable lesson her grandmother could have taught her. The best revenge wasn't proving your family wrong. It was proving yourself right so completely that their opinion became irrelevant. She'd built an empire while they weren't watching. She'd found love with someone who saw her clearly from day one, and she'd finally learned to see herself through her own eyes rather than theirs. The golden cage was not just open, it had been demolished entirely, replaced by horizons as limitless as her dreams.